So thank you all so much for coming tonight. I'm really looking forward to this. Talking about graduate school is one of my favorite things to talk about. So a little bit about me. My name's Katie Ryan. I'm currently the Career Community Advisor for Education, Nonprofit, and Social Impact here at Wellesley. I've been here almost 2 years to the day. And before that, I actually originally went to Smith College, so it's awesome to be back at a women's college campus. And then I went on to the University of Michigan to pursue a master's degree in urban planning. I really was interested in community-based and sustainability planning. And 1 year through that program, I was actually invited to participate in an interdisciplinary workshop in Vermont, where I was introduced to this amazing way of using dance and emotion and art to get people involved in climate change adaptation, and I was blown away. I thought it was amazing, and I decided to go and pursue a PhD in geography of all things at Rutgers. And I spent the next 2 years doing this research, and I loved it, and I published, and I presented at conferences, had a great time, until I started realizing that academia as a career path wasn't what I wanted to do. And it took some really tough soul searching to realize that academia was, I don't know, it didn't fit my values and priorities. I wanted to spend more time with students as opposed to applying for grants. I wasn't willing to move anywhere in the country to get that tenure track job. And so I decided to leave. And fortunately, I then got this job, and I feel like I won the lottery. But because of my journey, I feel really passionate about talking about graduate school and the questions that we can ask ourselves before we get there to make sure that it's the right fit for us at the right time. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So to go over our agenda, first we're just going to talk about what is graduate school. What do people mean when they say, are you thinking about graduate school? So it's pretty big. Then we're going to talk about questions to consider when you're thinking about whether graduate school is right for you, and then once you've decided it is, what programs are a good fit. And so on the back or front, I don't know, one side of your handout are some of those questions that we're going to go through tonight. And I've given them to you so that on your own time, you can take time to reflect on these questions that we're going to go over pretty quickly together tonight. And then I'm going to go over, okay, so you've decided you're going to apply. What then? What does the timeline look like? What does it look like to actually apply? And then once you've gotten in, what are some things that you should consider when you're thinking about different programs? And then the heart of it, the fun part, we're going to have our panel discussion. So I think we have 3 so far here, 3 of the 5. Can you just like wave? Yay! Okay. And I'll ask them some questions, and then I'll leave plenty of time for all of you to ask them your own questions. All right, what is graduate school? So at the heart of it, graduate school is an opportunity to dig into an academic discipline with more specificity and direction. It also can be an essential step to get into particular careers that need specific licensure or certification or degree. But within that broad umbrella term of graduate school, there are often some other terms that are thrown around. So you might hear the term professional school. This refers to graduate level institutions that prepare you for careers in specific fields. They're very practical, revolving around a specific profession. So you often hear these for like Masters of Architecture, Master of Library Science, law school, medical school, so on. And you might also hear the term terminal degree, and that just means it's the last degree you can get. You can't get anything higher. So you could get a master's in history, but the terminal degree would be the PhD in history. And typically those refer to doctoral degrees, but sometimes some programs don't have a doctoral level program, so like for instance an MFA, fine art degree, that's the end of it. All right, so to keep going. But okay, great, so you told me what the word means, but what is it like to be there? What is it all about? So it offers you the opportunity to focus deeply on a particular specialization or discipline. Unlike in college where you're encouraged, particularly at a liberal arts college like this, to check out all sorts of different academic disciplines, graduate school encourages you to, or forces you, right, to really zero in on a particular field of study. And perhaps one of the biggest differences between graduate school and college is that it's not anymore just about your individual coursework. It's about a lot of things such as working in teams, working on real-world projects with clients depending on the degree. Maybe you're in a lab. Maybe you're working on internships outside of the classroom. You're shadowing people in the field. So it forces you not just to think about your own coursework in the class, but also a whole bunch of other things that prepare you for that job in that field. Depending on the program, there might be an expectation that you're publishing, that you're applying for grant funding. This is particularly true at the doctoral level, because when you want to go on to get that teaching job, you're not just going to be looking at your grades, right? That's probably the last thing that they're looking at. They're looking at what money have you brought in? What have you published? What's your research focus? And so you are also doing individual research or projects, but chances are a lot of that is happening outside a specific class. It's instead something that you're pursuing throughout your tenure in the program. It's not just a project that you do over a semester. And so what this means is that the way that you're evaluated, both as an applicant and as a student in the program, is going to be different than college. It's not just about how you do in class, but what you do holistically. What are you involved in? What's your work experience? What volunteer opportunities are you doing? How do you work in a team, right? Graduate school also is really living on your own. You're probably not going to be living in campus housing. Probably going to need to find your own apartment, your own roommates. You're going to have to figure out how to get from campus to your house, how to budget, cook for yourself. You're going to have to really figure out what that work-life balance means in graduate school. And this could be completely different depending on whether you go to graduate school next year or you wait 10 years and you have a family and you have to balance those priorities. And there's also less faculty and advising support. And I don't want to say that you don't have an advisor. Often the advisor relationship is incredibly important in graduate school, but it means that there isn't going to be that person that's making sure that you fulfill your requirements. Nobody's making sure that you're taking the right classes. That's up to you. And so you have to make sure that you're navigating the systems and advocating for yourself throughout this program. But I think the best part about graduate school is that you get the opportunity to join a community of peers who are there because they love something just as much as you. You know, most of us these days, we go to college, but you really have to go out of your way to get to graduate school. You have to decide, this is for me. I'm going to go through this really stressful application process to join this very select group of people who are just as passionate about this very narrow thing that I am. And so it means you have this group of people that want to talk to you about what you are most interested in. And that's such a gift, to be able to have this network of people that you'll have not only as friends for the rest of your life, but also professionally. They're going to create your professional network. All right, so in other words, grad school is not college. And I know that this is scary, but it can also be exciting. You know, I hear from a lot of folks say that they want to go to graduate school because they love college. They love school, they're great at it, and they just don't want it to stop. And I totally get that. I was that person too. But graduate school is different. You know, it requires different things of us and it gives different things to us in return. And so the trick is knowing what questions to ask yourself when you're considering graduate school, so you know what program is right for you, if the time is right for you to go. And so, like I said earlier, that's really the purpose of what I want to talk about tonight, is to give you the tools to ponder if graduate school fits into your, or not if, but how it fits into your academic, professional, and personal journey. So before you can start asking which programs you should apply to, you first have to decide whether attending is the right next step. So up here, the first two questions I think are probably the most important. Why do you want to go? What do you hope to gain? Hi.
I'm Barbara.
Welcome. Yeah, you can just have a seat right in the front. We have 4 out of the 5 now, you all. Answers to the question why you want to go and what you hope to gain, such as, I don't know what else to do with my life, or I really like school, or I think I'm supposed to do it, aren't good reasons. So grad school isn't just a big financial investment and a time commitment, but it's also something that you get the most out of if you know why you're there. Unlike college, like I said, where you're encouraged to explore, this is much more focused. And so in order for you to be able to take advantage of the things that are going to get you where you want to go, you want to know where you want to go. You know, who are the people you need to talk to? What are the coursework? What are the faculty that you need to be involved in so that they can get you to that next step? And, you know, I recognize that life changes. You know, you might find a new thing that you love, like I did, right? In my master's program, I realized, oh, I want to go in this different direction. Things change. Ambiguity is real. But just to have those ideas in the forefront of your mind as you enter that process is going to make sure that the experience is fulfilling and effective. So once you have that idea of why you want to go and what you want to gain, the next question is whether there are multiple ways of getting there. So in other words, are there different types of degree types that are going to help you enter a career, or is there only one way of getting there? So for instance, if you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, you just have to go to medical school or law school. There's really no way around that, right? You need that degree. But on the other hand, if you want to go into something like marketing, for instance, you could get a master's in marketing, you could get a master's in communication, you could get an MBA, or maybe you don't have to go to graduate school at all, right? So that brings me to my next question. Is the degree necessary to enter the profession? Does it make it more easy to enter a profession? Or does it make it helpful when you want to move further along within a profession once you're already there? So again, the doctor-lawyer example, you just have to get that MD or JD to become a doctor or lawyer. But for other professions, maybe like architecture or K-12 teaching, a master's degree is incredibly helpful to break into those fields. But it's not an absolute requirement. And then in other professions, a master's degree really isn't necessary to enter, such as business, tech, or finance. But a master's degree can be incredibly helpful to get you to that next level, particularly in leadership roles, right? So it's important that you research the career interests that you have to figure out when's the best time. And to a lot of degrees, this could also be a personal question, but it's super helpful to talk to people in the careers you're interested in so that they can help you figure out what that timing is and what's necessary to succeed in that career path. Yeah. And then also, you're going to want to ask yourself, what else do you need to know? Every different path is different, or every path is different, every career is different, every program is different. And so you're going to want to figure out who in your network, whether that's career education, your faculty, friends, family, whomever, can give you that information that you need to know. All right, so you've decided grad school is the right step for you. You're going to have to start researching programs, right? So finding the program that's the right fit is going to require you to balance what you want to gain from graduate school with your personal priorities and values. And so let's consider a few of the things you're going to want to consider. So first, location. This is one that I think is super important and is often overlooked. It may play a small or large part in your decision. You know, for some people it's really important to stay close to family, or maybe it's really important to get away from family, I don't know. For others, it might be important to be in a location where their significant other or partner can find work. Still others, it might really make a difference depending on what career you want to go in. So think if you want to work in the federal government, going to school in the DC area might be really helpful to make the connections to help you network and get that job later down the line. And also cost of living. You know, you might be looking at two very similar programs in New York City and Bloomfield, Indiana. The cost of living in Indiana is going to be way less than New York, even if those tuition costs are the same. Also prestige. I know when applying to college, it's really tempting to look at those rankings as a way to narrow down what schools you want to go to. But in graduate school, this is a different game. Yes, rankings might be important for things like medical school or law school, but for the variety of programs, it's things like program specialty, faculty, focus are going to be much more important. And it's also important to remember that it's programs at this stage that are ranked, not schools. So you might know that such and such school is the most prestigious undergraduate university, but their history program might not be ranked as a school that is less well known. And so it's important for you to, talk to people who are in the fields, the disciplines that you're interested in, to get to know which programs are well regarded. And then there's also a whole host of questions to ask about the program itself. What's its focus, for instance? So this is super important. Just because you're looking at two programs in the same discipline doesn't mean they're going to be have the same offerings. So for instance, public health master's programs, MPH programs. One might focus on epidemiology and biostatistics, while another focuses on community health. The courses they offer are going to be incredibly different. The faculty that are there are going to be very different. And so you want to make sure that you find a program that fits what you want to study, right? It's also important to make sure that you think about questions like culture. Is this a group of people you want to hang out with, right? You're going to be spending a lot of time with your cohort. Are they really competitive? Does that get you revved up? Are they social? Are they fun? Think about that. That's important. And then also, how much does it cost? Is there funding? We'll talk about that more in a minute. And then faculty, incredibly important. Not only are you going to want to identify a program where the faculty are studying the types of things you want to study, that's going to go along with the program focus, but are there also faculty who can work with you? particularly for programs such as PhDs or programs where you have assistantships or you work in a lab, you're going to want to make sure that their faculty, that when you're applying, they say, I want to work with that person. I'm going to sponsor them. And faculty advisors are something I definitely want to touch upon more tonight, and so I'm going to let our panel kind of dig into a lot of that. And then finally, you're going to want to think about institutional resources. And what do I mean by that? So, for instance, when I was comparing PhD programs, I looked at geography at Clark and at Rutgers. Clark University's geography program is the most prestigious in the country. Who knew, right? Rutgers is not that well known. It's pretty small. But Clark is an incredibly small university with a smaller library, fewer departments, fewer resources, whereas Rutgers is in the Big Ten. They have a really big library. They have departments of so many different disciplines that I could work with. They have a research center that helps graduate students just find money, right? That's all they do. And so for me, it was really important to have those institutional resources. Somebody else might make a different decision, but think about that as well. So identifying these priorities isn't just going to help you narrow down that list, but it's going to be incredibly helpful when you actually start the application process. Because when you're applying to school, they want to see that you thought very carefully about why them. So if you've done all this research before, when you actually start the application, all those pieces about why you want to go there, what faculty is a good fit, what courses you want to take, how it's going to get you where you want to go, is just going to fall right into place. And then of course also, like I said, when. So should you go right after college? Should you wait and do a year of research? Should you wait and do 5 years of professional work experience? It's kind of going to depend on the program in the field, right? So for some programs, particularly professional programs, they really like to see that you've had some professional work experience. Particularly MBAs, they want to see that you've had that professional experience in the field that you can then bring into the classroom and contribute to your cohort. Other programs recognize that people are often going to come right into college because there's no way else to get into that career. So Master of Library Science programs are often like that, because to work in a library, it's very helpful to have that MLS. So this is another opportunity where it's really helpful to talk to people in the field and figure out what are the expectations. And then you're also going to need, most fun question, how to afford it. And like I said, this is super important, so I'm going to wait until next slide to really dig into that. And then another super important one is, what have graduates gone on to do? So are they doing the types of work in the places and spaces that you also want to work at? And typically graduate programs really like to highlight what graduates have gone on to do. So look on the website and look, are these careers that I would want to pursue? Is this the direction I also want to go in? So I know this list of questions is really broad. It's certainly not exhaustive. Depending on what you want to do, you're going to want to ask yourself different, more specific questions. But use these as a jumping off point to start asking yourself what programs are a good fit for you. Also, here I want to mention our grad fair is tomorrow. So the pamphlets I just handed out have all the schools that are going to be there. It's going to be all communities. I encourage you just to go. Even if you're not considering applying to graduate school for a couple years, it's an opportunity to practice asking these types of questions. The representatives at the fair expect you to go and just say, this is me, this is what I'm interested in, tell me about your program. And it's just a great way of exploring. Okay. Oh, it's the most fun part, financing. All right, so when starting this process of thinking about how much graduate school is going to cost, you're going to want to recognize that this can vary drastically depending on the type of institution, public or private, what type of program, and the degree type. So let's go through a few things. So first, you don't want to forget that the cost of going to graduate school starts before you even get in. So things like standardized tests, application fees, site visits, all add up really fast. If you think about how standardized tests can cost a few $100s, application fees, each school can cost upwards of $100, if not more, and if you apply to a few schools, you're looking at a few $1,000s by the time you're done and you haven't even gotten in. So just something to keep in mind. Also, tuition. So tuition can vary greatly depending on the type of program. So just like college, tuition at an in-state versus private versus public institution is going to vary. It's also going to be within public, in-state versus out-of-state, it's helpful to ask for those state universities, are there opportunities to get the in-state rate even if you aren't originally from there? So for instance, at Rutgers, I just had to live there for one semester. I got the lower rate. There's also fees, computer fees, student fees, activity fees. Try to figure out all those different pieces before you're done. Cost of living, incredibly important. Like I mentioned, depending on whether you're in a big city, on a coast, in a rural area, that cost of living for housing, transportation, utilities, food, insurance, fun, right? That's all going to really vary. And so you're going to want to think about that when you're comparing programs. Just because two tuition rates are the same doesn't mean the cost at the end of it is going to look the same. And then also super important is what type of funding is offered. So for instance, a lot of PhD programs offer what's called tuition remission. So that means that they cover your tuition. Sometimes tuition remission also comes with something like a TA, teaching assistant position, or fellowship. So not only is your tuition covered, but they also pay you to be in school. This is typical in PhDs, but it's sort of changing. And how much they give you is also changing. So for instance, if you're in a history PhD, you're probably looking at 7 to 8 years. But that doesn't mean they offer you 7 to 8 years of funding. So figure out what people do then to cover those other years. Also, are there merit grants, need-based grants? If you get aid in your first year, does that disqualify you from the future? If you don't get anything in the first year, can you apply for funding in a second or third year? Just some things to consider. And then if you aren't offered a full funding package and you aren't fortunate enough to be able to pay out of pocket, I don't think most of us can, you're probably looking at loans, right? And the most common types of loans are federal loans. There's direct unsubsidized, grad plus. I really encourage you to look at the Department of Education information about these because the interest rate for grad student loans are higher than for undergraduate loans. And this is something that adds up very quickly, and you're just going to want to make sure that the money you take out is something that the degree is worth, right? So for some programs, the cost is really high, but they understand that you're going into careers where you can pay that off eventually. But you might make a choice with that degree where you don't want to pursue that high-paying career. Maybe you get a law degree, but you want to be an advocacy lawyer in a community nonprofit. You're just not going to be making the same as a corporate lawyer. So does it make sense to maybe go to a smaller, less well-known law school? It's still going to give you the degree so you can pursue what you want to do, but without that price tag, right? And I totally understand that thinking about this is the last thing you want to think about when you're thinking about a program and you're so excited. I myself said no to a graduate program after Smith because I couldn't afford it and it broke my heart. And to this day, if I won the lottery, I'm going there. But these are questions that are going to be with you for the rest of your life. So you want to make sure you make the right decision. All right, so all this is to say that when you're identifying and selecting programs, it's not enough to just articulate your academic interests. You're going to want to pinpoint your professional goals as well. But you also want to think about your personal needs and your values and your priorities. And so in other words, it's a triangulation between the aspirational, the personal, and the practical. Okay, so you did all that. You did all that soul searching and reflection and research, and you decided you're going to apply. What do you have to do? So timelines can really vary drastically, particularly with med school and law school. They're just on a different timeline, and so I strongly encourage you to check in with our career community advisors for medical professions or for law school to make sure you understand what those processes look like. But for the majority of graduate school programs, if you want to start next fall, you have to apply this fall or early winter. So typically right now is the time you really need to be digging into that application. But deadlines are going to vary depending on every school, every program, so I would recommend having some kind of spreadsheet or some tracking document to make sure you know every deadline for each program and the corresponding requirements that go along with that. All right, so the first thing that I would encourage you to think about as you're applying is faculty recommendations. So really important, and also they need a lot of time. So make sure that you identify the professors that you want to have those letters from. Talk to them about why you're applying, what you're interested in, why you've identified them as a good person to write you a letter. Yeah. And we understand that this can be stressful. Professors sometimes can seem a bit unapproachable, but this is part of their world, academic references. They know it's something that you're going to need, and because, again, we know it's a little bit scary too, Career Education has created a resource on exactly this, on how to ask and approach faculty for recommendations. So feel free to look on our website for that. Around the same time, you're also going to want to look at whether they require standardized tests. Some tests, such as LSATs, aren't offered that often, so you're going to want to time it right so that you've taken the test with enough time to apply, to receive the scores back, and then send them out. That can sometimes take a little bit of time. You're also going to want to be working on assembling your application materials. So again, programs are going to require different things depending on what they are, but generally, you're going to be required to submit transcripts, a resume or curriculum vitae. And by curriculum vitae, I really mean an expanded resume that includes everything you've done, academics, leadership, you name it. We also have a resource on how to create that. The heart of your application is going to be your personal statement. And I want to stress that this is different than your college essay. This is something that makes you think about how your background and your goals and your experiences relate to the mission and the mission of the school, your desired outcomes, what you hope to get from it. So it's really a triangulation between you and what you've done, where you want to go, and what that school is going to offer you. And what that means is that every personal statement needs to be tailored to each program you apply to. And then depending on whether you're applying maybe to a creative program, a design program, a writing program, you might need to submit a portfolio or writing samples as well. Another really good thing to do as you're applying is reaching out to those programs, particularly faculty, particularly if you're looking at the doctoral level. You need those faculty to be able to advocate for you in the admissions process and say, this student reached out to me, this is her research, it's a really good fit for what I'm studying. I would really like her to be one of my advisees. Again, I understand that this can feel weird to reach out to a doctoral, a professor at that level and say, this is me, hi, I'm in college. But they expect it, again, right? They really do. Some of them won't get back to you. That's fine. That's the worst that can happen, literally. And if somebody gets back to you and is mean, you don't want to work to them, and thank goodness they did that, right? You avoided something horrible. And also, reach out to students that are in the program. What's it like to be there? Do they have fun? Do they find opportunities for research, for working with professors, for funding? That's a really great way to get to know a program. And we like to also encourage students to be ready to submit that application a few days in advance, even a week. Most applications, if not all, are all online now. God forbid you have a technical issue. You just want to be able to know you've sent it out, and if something happens, you have time to deal with the technical issue if it does arise. And then just some details about post-admission. So you submitted. Often it can take a couple days to a couple weeks for them to be able to confirm, yes, we received everything, particularly faculty recommendations. Sometimes those are slow to trickle in for you. But once that happens, then there is the review. Typically, programs have an internal set of criteria that they judge applicants, and the university at large also has some minimum cutoffs. So you have to get through both. Some programs have interviews, even multiple rounds. You're going to want to make sure that if they do require in person, you are able to get to that location so that you can do those interviews. And then decisions come out. Most often they come in 3 categories: accept, waitlist, deny. Typically acceptances go out first. And then once you have your offers, hopefully you've gotten a few, and you can compare, and you can visit, and you can negotiate. And when I say negotiate, I really do mean that. It is possible to negotiate different funding packages from different schools, and I would encourage you to do that to make sure that you get the best rate, and you can go to the school you want to go to. All right. I just threw a ton of information at you. Very quickly, before we transition to the panel, are there any questions about these technical elements that I just covered? Yes.
So for tuition remission, if they do it or not, is that like public knowledge? Is it?
It would be. They would say, this program is fully funded, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's typically something at the PhD level.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
The internal criteria, do we know what those are? Are they published?
It's going to depend on the program. They're probably going to say what they're looking for, and that would be on whatever program website they have. And that's something you can also ask the faculty, maybe when you're reaching out. What are you looking for in candidates? And it's also something that's probably going to be articulated through their personal statement prompts. What are they looking for? And sometimes programs do have things like GPA cutoffs or whatnot that might be higher than the university cutoff. But yes, those should be, to some degree, made visible.
If your standardized test scores don't get sent by the application deadline, is there a chance that your application isn't considered?
It might. It would depend on the program. If you think that's something that's coming down the line and you're worried about it, I would be proactive in reaching out to the department and say, my scores are on their way. I just want you to know. Please, know that they're coming, and then they can make that decision. I mean, so my partner applied to history PhD programs. She had one faculty member totally ghost her for a month. The letter got there a month late. She got in. It's fine. Like, programs know things happen, but it's really important for you to be proactive about letting them know, there's this issue.
When picking like a faculty advisor, or no, when picking someone at Wellesley or so to write you a letter, would you want to like pick someone who, like, say that I want to go into computer science in a particular direction? Would I want to try to find a professor who's also kind of in the same, they've also done something similar, or does it?
Yeah, you're going to want to pick faculty who know you
Okay.
and your work. So ideally, they're people who know you and your work in that discipline.
Okay.
But let's say you've just decided to kind of change gears. You're going to want to stick with those faculty who can still speak to your ability to do that type of work, to do research, what you're like in the classroom, whatnot. But typically, faculty who haven't worked with you directly aren't going to want to write a letter because they just simply don't know you. Yeah, and last question.
What do you suggest for balancing letters of recommendations, especially if you're applying for different scholarships and funding and different grad schools? Like, how do you prevent from overloading, one professor?
I think that's a great conversation to have with them. Just say, these are all the things I'm applying to. I know this is a lot. How does that feel? Would it be helpful if maybe I found somebody else to take some of this load? Chances are, I'm guessing they're going to be okay with it because they're going to write a similar letter for each program and they're going to tweak it a little bit. But I think it's a good thing to be upfront with them and say, I know I'm applying to a lot. Like, love you. All right, so with that, I want to introduce our panelists. So if our panelists can come up to the front.
Should we say in the order?
You can. Yeah, sure. It's just alphabetical.
Okay, we did it. Wellesley.
Oh, yes, it is
Fit in the line.
my dearest pleasure to introduce tonight's panelists. So first, since they're Wellesley alumnus, so they sat in the order. First, I have Barbara. She currently works as the administrator for the Black Hole Initiative at Harvard. She graduated from Wellesley in 2005 as a Davis Scholar, and then she went on to earn a Master of Art in Education Art, a really cool and unique graduate program at Harvard in 2011. And for years, she actually read and evaluated PhD applications for Harvard's Graduate School of Design, so she's a great person to talk to about how to make your application strong and stand out. And then next, we have Marian Johnson. She's currently a consultant for Frontline Solutions, a Black-owned race equity consulting firm, and she came to us all the way from North Carolina, everybody, so extra props there. She graduated from Wellesley in 2009 with a degree in English and then went on to pursue a master's in public policy from Duke. And then we have Stephanie Keep, right in the middle, who's the Director of Special Projects at the National Center for Science Education, as well as a science education consultant. She graduated from Wellesley in 2001 with an individually designed major in paleobiology. I think that's super cool. And from there, she went to Harvard to pursue a PhD in biology, but after needing to take some time off, she realized that she could actually pursue what she wanted, science writing and education, without the PhD, and she changed gears. I think that's a really important story for us to hear. And then next we have Chloe Mann. She graduated from Wellesley less than 2 years ago with a degree in philosophy. And after working in banking for a year, she decided to go for a degree in finance, and she's currently doing that at MIT. So she's going to be our resident expert tonight in what it's like to be in graduate school right now. And then finally, Abha Sharma is a postdoc fellow at Harvard's Chan School of Public Health, where she studies malaria drug resistance. And after graduating from Wellesley in 2012, she went right on to pursue a dual PhD and MPH at Northwestern. So please join me in giving all these Wellesley wonderful alumna a warm welcome. All right, so I just want to kick it off, and feel free, any of you, to jump in. If not everybody wants to answer a question, no pressure. You don't have to go in the order again. I wonder if you could share the factors that you considered when researching and choosing potential programs, really focusing on what made something a good fit for you.
I can jump in and answer that first.
Yeah.
I had only applied to 4 programs in the end. I was living in DC at the time. I was working for the National Partnership for Women and Families, and I knew that I wanted to go into either public policy or law. And so it took like my last year. I worked for 3 years before I went to grad school, so I took the last half of my second year working to decide, do I want to be a lawyer or do I want to stay in advocacy? My heart was with advocacy. I realized I just did not want to practice law at all. And so the choice was between going to schools part-time in DC and staying at my job, or moving to North Carolina, which is where I grew up, which is where my wife was getting her PhD at UNC, and which is just where there's a lot of interesting political stuff going on. So yeah, I applied to Georgetown, GW, Duke, and then UNC's MPA program, the Masters in Public Administration. Georgetown gave me $0 and said that they needed me to be full-time, and I was like, that doesn't work for literally anyone I know, but okay. And then GW, I think, didn't offer me any money either. Chapel Hill offered me something like 3 cents, and then Duke offered me a 50% scholarship, which was huge. And I was also looking at programs that were, so the money was a huge part of it, but I was also looking at programs that had a lot of practical application, that I could work with clients, I could work with real people on real problems, and I could also develop some of the quantitative skills that I absolutely skipped over learning while I was here at Wellesley. I did take the required stats course, but that was my second semester of senior year, so I was really I was checking that box. And so I was like, I need to learn statistics and economics, and Duke had a really quant-heavy first year in the program, and so that was really exciting to me. So all of those things were swirling around and helping me make that decision, but the month that I decided, which was April 2012. That was the year that Amendment 1 passed in North Carolina, which was the constitutional amendment to make same-sex marriage illegal. And I was like, well, when I left North Carolina, it was like an okay place to live, and now it seems like it's turning into a terrible place for a lot of us to live. And so I felt like I have to be there and doing something to help it become a better place for people like me to live. And so that's what made my final decision. So there was a lot of just financial decisions, just sort of personal, moral decisions, the fact that I wanted to live with my wife again after being long distance for a while, all of that factored into it.
I was working at Harvard, and I'll be just very blunt. Harvard, when you work at Harvard, if you can get into the Graduate School of Education, they pay 90% of your tuition. So it was, and they give you 3 hours off a week to take classes. And most colleges and universities today do that. My son just got a job at NYU. He was applying to business school, and they offered him this job and said, oh, by the way, we're going to pay 90% of Stern, so you can go at night and get your MBA. So, it's something to think about when you're financially, I had kids in college at the time, and I was working full-time, and I really couldn't take time off to go to school. So it's something to think about if you work in a higher ed situation, or a lot of corporations also do it now, may provide you benefits to pay for your graduate school.
We're just going. So I missed, but so I'm in the sciences, and sciences works a little bit different, as I'm sure Katie probably went over. But so I had to find someone. I was a paleontologist. I need to find someone who did paleontology research, and there isn't one at every university, which is shocking. So the way that I searched was like by looking at I knew from being at Wellesley which programs had good reputation for not just paleontology but vertebrate paleontology, which is like even like more specialized. And then you had to find, so then I sent out like a bunch of emails to people, and like my professors, like they're amazing, and so I met some of them at meetings by going with my professor here, reached out to them. You had to find out who has space in their lab, because someone could love you and think you're wonderful, and then but like say in 2 years I'll have room for you. So it's kind of finding out who had room and where the programs were. I also really didn't want to move very much. Everyone I know and love was in this area, so it turned out that Harvard had a program. They had a vertebrate paleontologist. He had space for me, so it worked out really well. So there's very I applied to one school because like everything sort of narrows. You get a sense of where, who has space for you. And I could have not gotten in. That was definitely a possibility, but I figured then I would just wait and apply the next year. But it is in the sciences, it can be. It doesn't always have to be, but for what I wanted to do, it's so specific that it was and I didn't want to move. So it was Brown had another program, and I was willing to go to Providence. I was fine. But the paleontologist there didn't have space, so he was like, I can take you in a year. So I was like, well, I'll apply to Harvard, see if I get in, and if I don't, then I can apply to both places next year. So, very different kind of consideration. And PhD programs in the sciences, we're lucky, we generally get it paid for, and they give you a stipend to be a teaching fellow. So financials were luckily not a consideration.
So for me, I think that in order to consider what graduates do to apply for, you have to look at what are your goals. What do you want to get out of graduate school? For me, I look at 3 things. So the first thing is, my goal is that I want a job outside of business school. So I look at the employment rates, because I think that's important, and what type of job do people usually go to. And then second thing is that I also want to build up on my quantitative skills. So of course MIT, T is standard for technology. So there's a lot of math requirements, and I struggled this summer, but it's okay, I got it through. And I think it's really, really helpful in terms of moving forward with just going forward with career in finance. Having the quantitative skill is actually very important. And then the third thing, I think, is also the ability of the program that I'm in, which is a Master of Finance program. It's finance specific, but also it have the ability for you to be flexible, which means that I can explore maybe impact investing. It's also finance, but you can have a value or a social impact within your profession. So that's something that I also want to explore. And I think the Master of Finance program at MIT actually helped me allow me to take different classes that's outside of just one specific set of core requirements. And that's another, factor that I was considering.
For me, I was also in the sciences. I was a biochem major, and I was one of those who knew I wanted to go into PhD program the first day I was at Wellesley. But things took turn, and I took women's studies classes with Professor Galarno. Anyone has taken that? Yeah, I love her. So I got really interested in public health after taking her classes, and I was like, but I like both. So I started looking at dual degree programs, and there was only one at the time at Northwestern that offered PhD and MPH dual degree program. I think Harvard is going to start something like that soon, but I don't know why they don't have that many. And it was also very important for me, even if it was going to be a program in life sciences, to be an umbrella program, because it's a liberal arts school here, so we are taking so many different classes. We don't really have specialty classes in biology. I never took a microbiology class when I was here, because at the time the faculty search was ongoing and there was no one teaching that class, for example. And immunology, I had never taken it, so it was important to have an umbrella program so I could try and rotate in different areas and see. And so I ended up applying to about, I think, I sat down with my advisor, and I would highly recommend doing that. I had done a thesis as a senior with Professor Suzuki, and I sat down with him, and we actually built my list of grad school that I was going to apply for, and we narrowed it down to 10, and I forget how many I ended up applying to. But my top choices were Hopkins and Northwestern, and I went both the places. In biology programs, usually you have interview person, and they actually pay for your whole trip, so you don't have to pay for anything. So that's what's sweet about the PhD programs in the sciences. Usually everything is paid for. Even in chemistry and physics, if they invite you for campus visits, they will pay for your travel and your hotel and everything. And after I went to 2 different places, until then, Hopkins had me sold because they have really good public health school, but I just hated Baltimore. So when she was talking about location, that's like really key, because if you're committing to a PhD program, at least in the sciences, it's at least 5 years of your life that you're spending there, and you don't want to be miserable. So Chicago was amazing. My school was at the medical school right downtown Chicago. So, during my incubation time, I could even go and shopping if I wanted. So those were and so at the end of it, I ended up narrowing it down to Northwestern versus Hopkins, and then I ended up with Northwestern because I could do a dual degree, and I really liked Chicago, and the grad students there seemed a lot happier. Like, that's like one thing that I would definitely recommend you to also look at. Go and see, like, during your visit, how happy are the grad students? Could I see myself being friends with them? Because I'll be here for a while. So those things will be really important. I know academics are important, but things outside of your school life are also very important. So that was a very long answer, but
That was so good, and a perfect intro to my next question. So, success in grad school, it takes more than just academics, right? We have to learn how to navigate academia, which can include anything from publishing to presenting at conferences to networking, applying for funding, teaching. But often these skills aren't taught directly to us. And so, I wonder how you go about learning these things. Typically, you might start seeing them referred to as the hidden curriculum. The things that you need to be able to do to thrive in academia, or even just in your graduate program, but nobody ever sits you down and says, okay, this is how you learn it. So I wonder if any of you could share a story of learning how to navigate these systems and do these things. It doesn't have to be a story. It could just be advice.
I'll get started first. So right now I'm actually studying at MIT, and I graduated a year ago in class of 2017. So before joining the school, I kind of already know what are the different resources there, or like what are the different classes or extracurriculum or programs or grants that you can apply for as students. And that's also one of the reasons why I decided to go to MIT instead of other school in another state I'm not familiar with. So currently I'm doing Israel Lab, which is recommended by one of the alum who have done the Israel Lab class. So for this, I would be traveling to Israel during winter break, so it's really cool. And then also, I just submitted my application for 100K pitch, which is a entrepreneurship competitions, and I learned it through a friend. So before I actually enter MIT, I have to reach out to alum who have done their MBA there, and then also alum who have done the similar Master of Finance program, asking them for tips and what are their favorite classes, favorite extracurriculum activity. So by talking to people, no matter they are professors, staff, faculty, or alum, or just friends who's in that school, would be actually very helpful to learn more about the hidden curriculum.
I used to say that I met students from when they were thinking about graduate school all the way to hugging them at commencement. I read their applications. I was usually the first person as the administrative director of the PhD program in architectural history, landscape architecture history, and urban planning. And 2 things, it's great to reach out to everybody, but do not ask alums, current students, or faculty things that are on the website. You will immediately be labeled, okay? So do your own research first. Second of all, don't ask to speak to faculty who don't oversee doctoral students. Okay, so it's really critical that you really learn the program. So people would come to the design school who want to do a PhD in architecture and ask to speak to one of the famous architects that teach studio there. Well, he has nothing to do with the graduate program. And so those are really important things to learn, is who actually takes PhD students. Now this program I oversaw took 5 students a year, fully funded for 5 years, very competitive. And when people came into my office to talk to me about it, I also listened to their language. And I said, do you think you can write a PhD dissertation between 300 and 500 words in English? That's not your first language. Could you really do this? And some people would get very offended at me. But you're not going to get into a PhD program in the humanities if you can't write. So you really need to be able to do that. You need to maybe take a course on research type style writing before you apply. So staff, to me, since I was the director, are some of the best people to talk to, because you can ask us any crazy questions you want, and we're not gonna, do anything about it. We're just gonna tell you the ropes. We're gonna say to you, you really need to figure this out before you come back here. So those are my 2 things I would just be really careful about when you start pursuing your information.
And my program actually had a mentorship program built in, and so the second years would all get, I think all of them would get a first year mentee, and so we would have somebody who could just show us the ropes and sort of give us the insight into the hidden curriculum that Katie was talking about. And my mentor was at the time, the chair of the Sanford Women in Policy, and I was like, yeah, you do pretty well. I think she had also worked for a women's rights organization. We had worked at women's rights organizations that were professional frenemies, and so we knew sort of each other, we knew what to expect from each other, and we got along really well, and she was really great at just sort of telling me, this is the sort of professor that you want to work with, this is the sort of this is a thing that you should prioritize in your first semester, you should get this class out of the way as early as possible, that sort of thing. And then the program itself was also very geared towards teaching you how to how to do this work for real, as opposed to just it's a very practically applied program, so instead of just how to do it academically, how to do this, how to be an analyst or a consultant or an advocate. So that was really dope.
Yeah, that's great. And rare, too,
Yeah,
to have that
very
kind of
rare.
mentor
Wow.
program.
That's great.
Yeah, I would just say that the programs are very different, and people learn, have different skills, and you know what your strengths are, and you also don't know what you don't know. One of the most important things is to find out what the other grad students do. You just made me think of that. Are there other things? Ask the questions of other people who would be, not your cohorts, your year, but people who are already in the program. What do you do? Are there, if I need help, are there places, are there programs for science? A big thing now is a lot of programs are starting to work on science communication, because there aren't research positions for everyone who goes and does graduate work in science, and they're also realizing that even if you do research, you still need to be able to talk about your research. And I don't know if you know this, but scientists aren't always very good at doing that. So that's a good thing to find out, and if that's important to you, and what are the other resources? Kind of feel that out with people. If I apply for a grant, is there someone that I can bounce this off of? Because you'll be I've never applied for a grant before, maybe you have, but, is there someone, do you feel like there's going to be someone that you could go to and say, can you help me figure this out? Because that's going to be important. It's just it's just like here, right? You rely on your your tribe, your people. Talk to them. And the professors, some, depending on the program, some are going to be awesome and have tons of time for you, and some aren't going to have any time for you at all, and the graduate students, you guys are on your own, so that your graduate student, co-graduate students are going to be extremely important resources.
Besides the current students, talking to senior grad students is really, really important. I can't emphasize that enough. But also your program people. For example, I was part of this Skill graduate program, and there was a dedicated program director, assistant director, and someone else who were our fathers and mothers. Like they were just like you had to, if you had a bad committee meeting, you'd go and cry with them, and you know, like they would help you with anything and everything. And they are also there as resources because they know what you can do, what resources are available for you. For example, like not websites are great, but they don't have everything. For example, like Northwestern's website doesn't advertise that you can actually take MBA classes for free as a graduate student of Northwestern. Like they have MBA students register, and then if there are openings, you can just take them. Like that's not advertised on the websites at all, but you find out through because the program directors send those emails. And so being, what you reminded me of was like being very proactive about, like no one's going to come and tell you, do this, do that. Like you have to be very, very proactive about finding resources that will pretty much build your CV. Because especially if you're interested in going into academia, like CV, like you gotta think about how you're building it and your publication record, so you gotta have that in your mind while you are doing different things, and have to be strategic about, because you can't fit everything into what you're doing, so you have to be strategic about what will build your CV for what you want to do as your next step after grad school.
Thank you. So I mentioned earlier in my presentation that the advisor relationship is super important, particularly for those of us in the PhD program, but really just generally. Could any of you share a little bit about your relationship that you had with your advisor, and maybe offer any wisdom into navigating that relationship? And I'm looking at you.
Oh, I had a very complicated relationship with my advisor. Things were fine at, usually how many of you are interested in PhD program? Because like some of this is like very, very, okay, great, because most of what I'm going to talk about is like geared towards PhD programs, so this is good. So at first, like especially in biology, you have rotations, so you have to do at least 3 of them. You rotate different labs, try it, and you are only there for about 10 weeks. And don't be fooled by, like rosy, everything seems rosy at the time, and people want you to join the lab, so they are a lot nicer. So you wanna talk and find out the hidden secrets of the actual lab environment before you commit. And things were fine for me for the first 3 years, and then as it got to the part, because like I worked in a biology lab here, and I realized that I really liked being independent, and I didn't want my advisor to be very hands-on. So I only rotated with advisors who had tenure, and that's important. Like if you work in a professor's lab where they don't have tenure yet and they are assistant, they want all these papers, so you might have more micromanagement than in an advisor who's already gotten their tenure and they are more relaxed because like they are set. So it will be either hands-on or hands-off based on what kind of environment, like where in their career the professors are. And so I only rotated with everyone with tenure because I knew I wanted to be independent. And so it was great. I loved everybody in the lab. But when it came time for starting to write papers and submit them, my advisor was so hands-off that he wasn't reading them. And so it was like taking months and months for me to, like get any feedback from him, because that was the only point where, where it started to become an issue. And so I actually ended up, committee is another major part of your PhD life. Like you'll have a committee that you'll select during your second year, and then you have a qualifying exam, and then you meet with your committee at least once a year to basically update them about your progress. And I took forever to select my committee because I really knew that towards the end of my program I would need them, not just for general advice on my research work, but also for next steps. And I really wanted them to be my allies for PhD. So it's really important to take your time with that. So I actually got my committee involved and said, like, my advisor is not reading my papers, so could you help me out? And so I had to sort of seek help outside of my relationship with my advisor to get that sorted, and it worked out at the end. But it was very, very stressful. So Well, a relationship with your advisor can start really nicely. It can always get sour, later on. And your committee is really like, take your time when you pick your committee, because they are going to be very important, especially if this kind of, conflict situation occurs. I mean, we are great now and we are friends, but at the time it just seemed like I was never getting out of grad school because my papers, we had a first author paper requirement, and so you couldn't graduate if you didn't have a first author paper. So at the time it felt like I was just going to be stuck there forever.
Stephanie, I know you two had really good, well, not really, but you also had, I'm trying to say not also, but on the other hand, you had faculty and mentors in your graduate school experience that really helped you.
Yes,
throughout
they
your
just
career.
weren't my advisor.
Right.
Yeah. So again, like I feel like anyone sciences, I don't want to like bore everyone with like tons of science. I will try to make it okay, good, yay. So my advisor he was this like, I don't even know how, he's passed away, so that's why I have my past tense, but he was this gentleman scholar. He's like the type of guy that like, I kid you not, he had a leather vest and like a hat, and he was like 6.5 feet tall, and he just like strode around in cowboy boots, but he was like actually from Old Money in Concord. He's this really bizarre guy, and he had his name over everything. He's one of these, in paleontology, like you discover a fossil and you get like, whenever you publish name, your little like names behind, like he's discovered everything. Deinonychus, the dinosaur that the velociraptors were based after, that was him, and like all these, like he's just like this big deal. And he was super nice. Had no, like, I was not the type of grad student he should have taken, because my Wellesley advisor, Emily Buchholz, was like the best person in the whole world, and I had such a close relationship with her, and I was expecting grad school to be similar. Like, I'm gonna have like, my advisor's gonna love me, and it's gonna be awesome, and I'm gonna hang out in his office all the time, it's great. No. My professor would have loved you. Wanted someone who was like super happy, like on their own, like really like fiercely independent. I didn't mind working hard. Working hard is fine, but like I found that I did want someone to be like, good job, Stephanie, like woo, like, and that just was not him at all. And I think this is a problem. I think this is a thing that women in science especially like hit a lot, and there's been a lot of like this wave coming through of women who are in science trying to change how things are. And I mean, I'm sure it's in other fields as well, but science is a very old boys club, and so trying to break in and women have different needs, like, and I don't mean women in like, just like, some people just want to be told like, you're doing a great job, and science sometimes is really just not for that. And there are all these stories of people who've left programs, and they'll say to their advisor, like, I thought I was, I just wasn't doing well. The advisor will say, what are you talking about? You're the best graduate student I ever had. You're like, why the heck couldn't you have told me that, like, 6 months ago? It's hard. And so we just did like, so we didn't, he wasn't that person. But across the hall, this man I worked for a year, I took 1 year off, my big, like, rebellion, taking a year off. I worked at Harvard for a year before I started grad school there. And he became like that voice for me, and the person, like, I would wander in there and talk to him for a long time. My co-graduate students were wonderful as well, and I'd hang out with them, and they were super helpful. And when I just was making the decision to leave the graduate program, is this other man, Charles Marshall is his name, he's out at Berkeley now, but he was the one that was like, oh yeah, like this makes total sense, and was very supportive and gave me a ton of people to reach out to and like other things to do. So I did have that relationship, just wasn't with my advisor.
That's great. He was cool with you leaving. Usually there's like,
My advisor wasn't cool with me leaving, but
no, your other
yeah, and because he knew that it, like when I was talking to him, he's like, yeah, this makes sense, like, he knew that it probably helped that he was miserable at the time too, that's why he's not there anymore, but it's like, yeah, this place sucks, get out of here, let's go together. Maybe that colored it a bit, but yeah, I mean, generally they don't like you to leave, that is true. You get kind of talked into it.
So speaking of, I often worry when I give this talk that I make it sound a little bit too scary. But graduate school can also be a lot of fun. And so I wonder if we could just all share like a story of something that you really enjoyed about graduate school.
I will say I went into it like with kind of the reality TV show mentality. I was like, I'm not here to make friends. I'm here for my degree. I'm gonna be in and out. And I was also living in Chapel Hill as opposed to in Durham, where Duke is, just because my wife was at Chapel Hill, and we're like, this makes more sense. She's getting a PhD. She's gonna be here forever. Like, let's live in Chapel Hill. So I was sort of like, I went into it feeling sort of like pre-isolated and being like, I'm just here to get the degree, and then like ended up making incredibly close friends really, really quickly. Like, and people have remarked about this about our cohort, that we bonded super quickly and super strongly, and just like loved spending time with each other, and like loved being in study session together, loved having like themed parties all the time, like just hanging out all the time, and just like genuinely. I remember our econ professor said, I've never seen anyone be so excited to be in an 8:30 econ class as you guys. Like, you guys are just like, we would come in and be like, oh, I haven't seen you since Sunday, this is so dope, I'm so happy to be here, high fives, this is great. I don't like, it was really not me, and it was really just like not my like expectation, but it was so incredible, and like, we were all still like, we're going to each other's weddings and like baby showers and all this stuff, and like, yeah, so like I really just didn't expect to make like, people who I know I'm going to be friends with for the rest of my life, and that was, yeah, that was incredible. That's my favorite thing about grad school.
Yeah, my favorite thing is also about people. So as I mentioned, that math class was really tough during the summer. So like I bonded really well with my other friend who was also struggling with math. And then like we would study together from after classes from 6 p.m. to like 1 or 2 p.m. 1 or 2 a.m., which is I do not recommend. But we really bond really well. And then now I think he's one of my best friend after the course, and now we're into taking different courses and elective now, but we're still really good friends. And then also my advisor, my academic advisor, was so worried about me. She would text me her phone number and be like, hey, I live around Sloan, let me know if you need me or like want to talk at night. So that's something I really appreciate. It's like people might be, actually you might not never expected this type of relationship come along, but I'm glad that like I got those friendship and then also mentorship from my advisor.
I do think that people in graduate school, you share something very special with them. Because I was still working full-time while going to graduate school, I wasn't able to participate as much in some of the things. It was very similar to my experience at Wellesley as a Davis Scholar, because I was raising 3 young children at the time. So I had to be really careful what I could do extracurricularly. But the really great thing I had from my master's program in art and education was I decided to do a capstone project, and I got to do primary research up at Smith actually on a women's architectural graduate school that was in Cambridge that not many people know about. So that was very exciting to me to have that opportunity to get to do real research that I hadn't had a chance to do before. I didn't do a senior thesis at Wellesley. The second thing too, and I think this parlays into if you're doing an MBA, an MPH or a PhD or anything, is you will see these people, your cohort, at conferences the rest of your life, along with your advisors and everybody else, especially if it's a small, interesting like paleobiology. You know, you would definitely be running into the same people. For the Black Hole Initiative, you know, I'm dealing with astrophysicists who are looking at black holes. There is this teeny tiny group of people in the world who do that. So they all know each other, they all see each other. And just quickly, that's another point with your thesis advisor, because believe it or not, that person will write your tenure letter if you go into academics. Mm-hmm. That person will tell you if they hear about a job that's coming up in your area that hasn't hit the kind of the big public ad campaign that faculty jobs tend to go on. So if I leave you with anything, it would be to really think carefully about the program, but also about who you're going to work with in that sense.
I mean, it can definitely be awesome. Like, I know that I'm the one that left, but I remember distinctly there's this, I mean, you get to sit around for hours and, like, talk about a paper that's, like, super cool, and, you know, you get to wander into people's labs, and you get to, like, learn. I mean, I like to learn. Like, that's, and so there's this one moment in my second year, I think, where I was at some, like, dive bar. Was I don't even remember. I was like, we're having hamburgers at like 11:30 at night, and I was with this guy who I still, like, you're right, the cohort, he wasn't in my lab, but like, and I randomly found myself writing an essay about his research, and so I wrote to him, and now, anyways, it is a very small world. But we're sitting there and we're like eating hamburgers at 11:30, and we're discussing this like paper on frog development or something, I can't remember. And like we just sort of looked at each other and he's like, dude, we get paid to do this. Like, this is amazing. And we were like 21 years old or whatever, and we're getting paid to sit around and like talk about frog development. And I mean, that's awesome. So it can be super fun, absolutely. And that's a privilege. It's amazing to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, the fact that you get paid to test this wild idea about science that you have is amazing. Like, I can share my experience of this. I read this paper on like Toxoplasma gondii, which is like a parasite, and then I was like, oh, this protein is so cool. I wonder if my parasite also has it. And then I looked for it, and it had it, and nobody had studied it. And I went to my advisor, and he was like, oh, I think it would be cool to test it because we did do research related to that. And then he was like, well, focus on your main one, but sure, you can try it on the side. And then it ended up being the coolest discovery that I actually made in the school, which is still not published because he still has my paper. But it was the coolest thing because like you run an experiment and you find a result, and the fact that you are the only person in the entire world who knows that result is just so exciting.
Cool. So cool. That's awesome. So I want to leave time for student questions, but I always like to end my portion by asking you, is there anything that you came to share tonight that I didn't get a chance to ask that you'd like to offer?
It's okay if you get there and it's not what you thought it would be. I think that's the most important thing for me. Like, yeah, I had total tunnel vision. Like, I was at Wellesley, I love doing research with my advisor. I'm like, I'm clearly gonna go and just get my PhD, I'm gonna become my advisor, this is gonna be amazing. And when I got there and started doing it, I was like, this sucks. It was so disappointing, and it was like a little bit heartbreaking. I loved hanging out, I loved the like 11:30 cheeseburgers talking about frog development, but there were aspects of it that I really didn't like. It was very oddly competitive and insular, like despite my best efforts to like get everyone to discuss as much as possible, just my particular field. And I was like, I don't want to, and I see people and they had to go and you do postdocs, you get postdocs in awesome places, but a lot of people are like, my postdoc is in the middle of where, somewhere very far away from their friends and family, and as I mentioned before, I like my little New England bubble. And I was like, maybe I'm not willing to do this. And it took me like a year to fully to test that idea out. And I talked to so many people. I talked to people that left and people that stayed. And like I said, I had this great mentor who gave me other people who were doing, he asked me like, what do you like doing? I was like, I love teaching. I love getting to, write about, stuff like for the journal clubs, and I love being able to do all that stuff. He's like, all right, well, maybe you should look at these things. And I had never thought about doing anything besides being an academic like that. I had just had blinders on. And so it took a while, and it was not the easiest thing in the whole world, but it's been great. Like, I don't regret it. It's fine. Like, I think that there are people for whom the PhD is absolutely the perfect thing to do, and they love it, and they knew they want to do it from day one, and that's awesome. Like, it wasn't me. And I know lots of people who have left programs, switched programs, gone away and then come back. One of the coolest people when I was there, she was like, at the time I thought she was so old, she was like 30, and I'm so much older than that. But like, she'd gone and done something else, and then she came back, and she had such clarity about what she wanted to do because she had been out in the world and so she wasn't going to get her PhD because that's what I'm just supposed to do, which is pretty much why I had done it. She was going because she had a specific goal in mind and something that she wanted to do and achieve, and so she was amazing, and she was so inspiring, and I saw her and I'm like, that's who should be doing this. And my, you get find people who love it, and I just found that wasn't the environment I wanted to be in. And it's okay, it'll be okay. You can change your mind, you can go away and you can come back, or you could love it and tear it up, and it'll be perfect. But keep an open mind. You're not locked in. You're not swearing away the next, X number of years of your life. There's no decision that can't be undone. it'll be fine.
This is not necessarily a disagreement with that, but I would say if you are coming up out of your own pocket for grad school, like just
Yeah, it's very, I'm in a very different
just
situation.
be
Yeah,
sure,
sure.
be
No, you're
sure
right.
that like if you can pay for it, like you can take on the loan, like you can take on the debt, and that's something that you can pay off and be okay. And I think part of that decision is like making sure that whatever your degree is aligned with what you see yourself doing.
Yes.
You know, in the future. Like I didn't think that I was going to be in the for-profit world ever. I didn't think I was going to be a consultant, but it is still very aligned with like what I want to do. And I wouldn't have done that. Like I wouldn't have been here without my degree. But I'm also like, right now I'm making $75,000 a year, and I'm paying $720 a month for my degree. And I'm like, I pay it every month, and I'm like, you know what? I'm glad I have this degree because I can actually afford to pay it. Like, this is great. I love my job. I love the fact that I have this degree and I use it every day. But it is still like, it's super expensive, and I feel like I'm going to be an indentured servant for most of the rest of my life. So just know that like, if you're going to be paying for a degree, like you just need to know like, it has to be worth it for you, and you have to be able to like actually live with this decision. Because unfortunately, that's one thing that cannot be undone. Like,
Yeah, no, yeah.
you took out the
I'm
loan.
super
like,
glad you said
cannot
that.
even die and
Yeah.
get out of paying these loans. Like I was told this in my
What
in my
if you had
loan
left the
counselor.
program? If you had left the program, would you still
I'm still on
owe-
the hook to the government
for the full amount?
for the amount that I took out.
For the amount you took? Oh.
Yeah.
So even if like you took out 3 years worth and you left after 1, would you have to pay 3 years worth back?
Yeah.
Okay, that's important.
Yeah. And like, they specifically said like, do not die and think that you're gonna get out of this. Like my grandcast will be paying for this. Like this is, they are getting their money back.
Yeah, that's the thing I would leave with before questions is think about working before you go to grad school. I think it's a really healthy thing to do is just to get out in the real world for a year or two. I also think it makes you more competitive.
Yeah.
It was almost unheard of for us when I was reading applications for the design school and GSAS to take, I would say in my 8 years there, took 5 a year, so 40 students. We maybe took 4 straight out of undergrad.
Yeah, I would advocate the same thing. So I was actually debating during my senior year whether I should apply my senior year or I should work for a year and then apply. And then of course there's 2 benefits, as you just mentioned. One is if you apply and if you work for a year, you would know what you like and what you don't like, so you probably have a better idea of what you want to apply to. And then also at the same time, you're more competitive and you'll be able to contribute more, especially in a business school setting where you have to kind of talk about your experience or participate in class. Another thing I will add on to that is to really just treasure your time at Wellesley. Yes, and then especially like I think professors, now that I'm studying in a big research university, I think the access to professors is definitely not as well compared to Wellesley. So build a good relationship with your professor, just go into office hours, just say hi, whatever. And then they will that will also help in terms of asking for them for a recommendations. And well, like people, especially professor at Wellesley, they're so willing to just write your recommendation. Just talk to them about, hey, I'm thinking about graduate school. What do you think? You know, any advice? Just, I think, do that while you're here.
Yeah, you will never get those types of relationships ever again. Like, do not expect that to happen in grad school. Like, for example, I came here today for this panel, right? Right before that, I went to Science Center and chatted with my advisor for about an hour before coming here. And I don't think I'll do that with my PhD advisor, although we have a pretty good professional relationship still, but we don't have that intimate relationship that I had with my Wellesley advisor. The thing that I want to emphasize is I made a whole list, but I'll just share 2. Being the Wellesley woman that I am. Network. I can't emphasize enough. Meet people that do cool research, like if you're in the sciences or any field, go to conferences. Even if you only have little data, apply for that conference, go present your work. It will still give you exposure. Try to meet with other people. Like if you're not sure about PhD programs yet, then email people, get a research tech job if you're in biology. like people in my cohort, it was quite a range. There were only like 4 of us who came. There were 30 people. Only 4 of us came straight from grad school. There were people who had taken years off from starting from like 1 year to up to 6 years. And so give yourself time to figure out if this is the right thing for you, as everybody else mentioned. And another thing about academic setting is that not all jobs are listed. So I cannot emphasize the importance of cold emails. Like, the Wellesley gives you the confidence to email the authority, so do it. So the job that I got at Harvard right now is actually, I got that job through a cold email. I did my homework and CC'd her assistant because she's a pretty big PI, so she's not gonna go through all the emails. And I actually got a Skype interview, and then I came here and then got the job. And it was from a cold email. I had never had, because I was switching fields, I had never seen her at the conferences that I attended, so that way it was possible, and it was, and it works. And a lot of times people don't even post them. Like we hired a tech in our lab, and the job wasn't even posted, and it was a fresh graduate who had emailed our lab, like cold email. So can't emphasize the importance of networking and cold emails.
I completely agree with that, and don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. Like if they don't want to help you, they will like ignore your email, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And like most of the time, you'll actually find out, because I'm the type of person that I do not want to bother anyone, and I feel bad about like asking for a favor. But like now, I just start learning about like, hey, if you meet someone at an event and you talk to them for like maybe 10 seconds, that's okay. Get their business card and follow up afterward, because a lot of people do not do that. And if you follow up afterward, you know, if that person replied, then you know that that person is actually very willing to help. And like I have received maybe over like a lot of emails from, or LinkedIn mails from current students, and that's okay, because like I like am actually very willing to help others, fellow Wellesley students. And I do think that like other alums feel the same. So just feel free to reach out and don't be afraid. The worst case, like no one replied to emails.
I'll always reply.
Yeah. So do we have any questions from the group? I saw that hand first.
Okay, so we talked about like letters of recommendation from professors, like when we're applying. This is maybe more of a technical question, not like a panel question, I don't know. If you do take a break between Wellesley and grad school, what do you do about your letters of recommendation? Do you get them from employers, or
Do you think Wellesley professors will forget you? They'll forget you?
I just wrote my art history professor who's been retired for 10 years because I went to Rome. I graduated in 2005. And then within 24 hours I got an email back. I'm not gonna forget you.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, and I think it can't hurt to kind of try to stay in touch now and then with the professors you know, 5 whatever years down the line you're going to want to reconnect with.
Yeah.
And also for some professional degrees, like for instance, I went into an urban planning program. If I had worked in urban planning for a couple of years, one of my recommendations could have been my supervisor, for instance. But still, it's important to just keep those faculty recommendations kind of going, and also know, you go to Wellesley, those professors are going to remember you and want to write you letters.
And if you're at all worried about it, you can always say, like, hey, I'm going to take a few years off, but I'm going to be coming through for a letter of recommendation in a few years. And they can always, like, write a few notes down to themselves. But I think most of them know. I mean, they're not going to forget you.
I would say though, like probably you do want to have a mix, like not just one person's going to write your letter of recommendation, so you would probably want somebody who knows you from your professional life as well as your academic life.
And then I just want to add on that, because I think someone asked about like, oh, do you want to bombard like 1 or 2 professor? Like how do I decide a mix of professor that I ask? It really depends on like the range of program that you're applying to. So for example, if I apply to just a humanity program, I might ask my humanity professors and an econ professor, and then if I'm applying for like a business or finance related, I might want it more quantitative, let's say my math professor or my econ professor, and then an employer. So, just make your judgment based on, what makes sense for you and for the program.
The green?
Yes. So kind of piggybacking off that question, what do you do if you do take a few years off? Like what looks good? Should be like doing, I want to go into a PhD program in anthropology. Like should I be looking for like research, or like what? I don't even know. Like whenever you say like find a job, like what what do you look for, and like
I think with I'm sure that there are exceptions to this, but I think in general, there's no specific job that like a future, professor reading your anthropology application is going to be like, oh, she did this job and not that job. Like, I mean, I think you're like a little collection of skills, and you're going to pick up skills, and you're going to pick up experiences and different things, and then you just learn to like. I mean, this is a lifelong tip, by the way. Then you just spin it to what the thing is you're applying, right? So you take the pieces. If you did something and it has absolutely nothing to do with what you're applying for now, but you did a lot of writing. You said like I learned to write, and I know that that's going to be I'm going to be able to apply that to this next position. You just have to. You're just skilled. There's no prescription, I don't think. So do something that is interesting and is going to make you happy and is cool. And then see what happens. I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's a right answer. I mean, I think like in business school, right? I think people want. Is that even wrong?
I mean, people probably want very diverse backgrounds. So like one thing that I would look at is just search up people LinkedIn or like ResearchGate if that's science, and then like see what are their background. It's like a reverse engineering. It's look at now they got here, what they do before, and what type of function and what type of skills that person have. And look at what you lacked of, and then maybe find a job that bridge that gap.
Yeah, I mean, if there's something where you feel like like you guys were saying, like quantitative skills. So if like if you feel like that might be a hole, try to get a job that might use some quantitative skills. Like that might be one thing to think about. Or like I'm not that great of a writer. Maybe I should do something where I have to write a lot and sort of to build up the skills. You could also reach out to current graduate students in anthropology and find out what they did. Before they went and try to get some ideas, but I don't think there's no prescription.
And remember too that Career Ed is here for your lifetime. So you can always come back and talk to us, and we can help with that process of the spin or the translation to show, I have all of these different skills. How do I create this narrative? But I think it's absolutely right. I saw a question down here originally. Maybe not. Oh, it's gone. Okay. Yes.
Hi, so this is a more field-related aspect, but it has to do with public policy and policy in general. So a lot of the times I feel like public policy or policy generated fields are very into experience. And so I was just wondering, based on your experience, how the classroom ratio was. Was there more people like who had a lot of experience, or was it like straight out of college, or did they try to like balance it?
That's a really good question. I know in my cohort, we had 4 people who were straight out of undergrad, and we all knew who they were, and we're like, all of us. It's like, no offense, it's very clear who came straight out of undergrad in a program where they really encourage you to have at least 2 years of experience. I think people who come straight out of undergrad are expecting this to be college 2.0. And are very, very focused on like grades and like a little bit more competitive than people who have worked and be like, oh, great, nobody cares about grades. Like, this is not true, I guess, about PhD. I don't know what y'all do, but in my master's program, like nobody cares about grades. It's just about making sure you've learned the material. With regards to experience, like we had some people who had been, like in the workforce for like 10 years. I think the median was about 3, and a lot of us worked in nonprofits. Some of us had worked, like on the Hill. And so we mostly had like policy or political experience. And then we had a couple people coming from the business sector who were making a transition. And then the people who were dual degrees, like some of them had like worked at law firms, as paralegals. But yeah, so it was mostly like nonprofits that we were all coming from. Is that a good answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Right. It's technically 6. Can you guys stay a little bit longer, or should we wrap up? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm planning on taking some time off between Wellesley and potentially applying to grad school, and for my specific interest of places to go into, typically they recommend having 2 semesters of chemistry, math, and physics. And I have math and physics, but I don't have the chemistry. And I'm just wondering, like, do you need, like, if it says sometimes on grad school program, like, websites, like, oh, we would like it if these things were here, does that necessarily mean that they will not consider your application if you don't have those things?
I have a strong,
in reading applications, if it's between you and somebody who has the chemistry, and you both have very similar, potential, they may take the person with chemistry. So in the humanities, they often want you to have a foreign language, especially in the arts, German. So if you don't have German and somebody else does, again, so my recommendation would be for you to go to the Harvard Continuing Ed or go to, Mass Bay or wherever and take 2 semesters of chemistry.
So, my program, when I got in, I was told, this is fine, but you have to take organic chemistry. So it was like, they gave me it was organic chemistry and I had to take a developmental biology class or something. So like they sort of looked at what I had taken and they wanted me to take these couple things. And I was like, okay. So I took organic chemistry in a summer thing, and then I took a developmental course as one of the courses I took in my first couple of years of grad school. So I'm assuming it's sciences that you're interested in?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's going to be, sorry?
Geology. Planetary science.
Love geology. But I think, paleontology, it's like half geology and half biology. What's going to be much more important is going into the right lab. Do you know what I mean? So like if the professor wants you, if like they're like, I want this person to be in my lab in my graduate student, they'll figure out a way, and if they have to, you'll just have to like say, I promise I'm going to take 2 semesters of chemistry in the next year. You know what I mean? Does that mean that could it hurt for you to take it now? No, of course not. Like, but it's kind of up to you.
And it's better. Oh no, that's you.
This might be a bit long and maybe too personal, but mental health is a big topic at graduate institutions.
That's a great question.
Can you guys speak to any possible, like, your experience with mental health in graduate school and what that's like?
Oh, yeah. I walked many a graduate student down to health services. So you need to find a touchstone. I was a lot of people's touchstone because I was the administrator, I was the mom, and I was also had done graduate school myself, and I was in graduate school. But yeah, definitely you need to find somebody who you can be open and talk with, and a lot of times it's not your advisor, it's somebody else. Outside of that, either a staff person or another student. But just, you need to make sure that there's somebody there who you can open up with. I think graduate school is very stressful, especially coming out of the Wellesley level, because you are very much, a lot of the time, I mean, you were blessed to have this incredible cohort, but sometimes you get into programs where you don't see the other people in the program. They're all busy off doing their research someplace and you don't even see them. So you really need to make those connections to take care of yourself.
I would also add that's another great thing to research when you're considering programs. Like, so when I was at Rutgers, my partner struggled with mental health. I had a lot of friends who really struggled, and the Rutgers Health Services was not helpful. To the point where they really made it seem like, oh, well, that's your problem and that's a physical weakness. And I don't know necessarily how I would have found out about that, other than honestly asking graduate schools, how supportive is it to find counseling? Does the insurance cover counseling? Does health services prescribe medication, or do they think that you're trying to get it to sell drugs? Honestly. So I think that's a great question to ask about when you're talking to students about what is this program like? What is the culture? What is the administration? What's insurance like? That's a really great question.
I ended up taking a semester off because I had a different, not a mental health issue, but another health issue put me on a medication that basically like I was just too stressed out. Like there was too much going on, and so I ended up taking a semester off. And it was when I took that semester off that I was like, that things started to really like clear up for me, when I sort of realized, what made me happy and what didn't make me happy and everything else. So that's so yes, definitely find support. And don't be afraid to take a break. One of the other great things about graduate school, I know it depends, of course, but it tends to be more flexible than a typical 9-to-5 job, right? Like I had a boyfriend in England. I was able to take off every few months. It was a lot cheaper to fly there then, and go and visit him for a while. And it was flexible. And I wanted to spend a summer somewhere, so I was able to go and just kind of do that. So use that to your advantage and use that flexibility to get out and go do something, take long weekends, find an excuse, be like, I really need to talk to this person in some other place that's really nice and I want to go visit, and just go do it, because if you can get out of it, it's only going to do good things, it'll only help.
Northwestern actually had a really good counseling center, so I went there a lot, especially during last 2 years of my PhD. And it was, I don't know if they had a limit on how many times you could go. I would go once a month, and it was a great resource, and it was in, Northwestern has 2 different campuses. It was in both the campuses, and it was open, and it was completely free to all students. So look for those resources, and I can't emphasize enough the work-life balance part. Like, do not feel guilty about not working over weekend. Like, it's okay to take the break, and you will probably be more productive. Like, I burned myself out first 2 years of grad school, and after that I was like, I am gonna take Saturdays completely off, and then my life just got so much better. My experiments worked even better after that.
I have a question about choosing. So I'm studying psychology and political science, and I'd be interested in either a master's degree in psychology or law school. So like you said, I plan on working for a couple of years. But, I don't know if that should be like as a paralegal, for example, or as the helper in a psych lab, because right now my plan is I'll find whatever will take me, and if I hate it, I guess I'm supposed to do the other one.
That's not a bad plan.
But then the issue is, I also am interested in marketing, I also am interested in communications, but what if I'm doing something completely different? And I was just wondering if, yes, wait a couple years, work, but work in what and how to choose and what to apply to. Okay.
Talk to your college career mentor.
No, that's a really good question.
You mentioned you were thinking about law school and public policy, and then you chose, but how?
I think part of it was just everything that all of my values really aligned with one thing over the other. Like the idea that if I go to law school, that's also going to be super expensive, and that's going to, like Katie said, that's going to gear me towards the sort of law that I wouldn't want to practice. I don't want to practice corporate law. I don't want to. That's just not where I'm at. And so if I'd want to be working in a nonprofit as a lawyer, but I went to a super expensive law school, it's not going to make a lot of sense. So my values really just aligned more with policy and not practicing law, and being an advocate. I think it's also I was also an English major. I wasn't a poli-sci major. And so I loved being an English major, and I loved that a lot, but I also just knew I'm not doing this for my career. This isn't, I still read a bunch and I talk about books a bunch. I write a lot for work, and I feel like my degree helped teach me how to write really, really well. But I'm passionate about a lot of things that I don't do for my job. It's
Right.
not
You can be good at a lot of things, be interested in a lot of things. That doesn't mean your career needs to be in a lot of things. That's the, so, and so it's hard. How do you figure out which one to make your career? Chances are pretty good that it's gonna figure it out for you, as you meander through. If you talk to people who've been working for a while, not very many people are doing, in 30 years what they thought they were going to be doing 30 years ago. Your path kind of does this, and that's what makes it super interesting. For all you could end up being a psychologist to people who go to law school and need help with their marketing. There are jobs that you've never see, but there are jobs that you never.
And going to be a therapist, but she was already a lawyer.
So there are jobs that you never knew were jobs, and there might be jobs that don't exist, but you're gonna make it happen. So just, you can only do one step at a time. That would be my advice to you is if you think you're gonna take time off, that's awesome. So just focus, don't worry about grad school yet. Think about what's the next job, what's out there, what's interesting, where are you willing to go, narrow it down and just do something that's gonna make you happy in that first step, and then worry about the step after that once you're there. Don't try to figure out I want to retire at this age and have this title. What do I do? I need to work backwards. That's, you can do that, but it'll probably not turn out the way you think it will anyway.
That is an
Thank you
amazing
so
place
much.
to end for career education. So if anybody has questions, feel free to come up at the end, but let's give one more round of applause.